The cantina on Kepler's Rest hummed with the low chatter of dozens of different alien species, their voices mixing into a symphony of clicks, growls, and harmonic tones that would have been impossible to understand just a few decades ago. The air was thick with the scent of various atmospheric processors, working overtime to accommodate the breathing needs of creatures from 100 different worlds. In the far corner, away from the main crowd, sat a figure that most patrons gave a wide berth to whenever they passed by his table. Zixtara had once been a proud warrior of the Veltar Empire, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming with the deep blue coloration that marked him as nobility among his people. Now, 40 cycles after the war that had changed everything. His carapace was dull and scarred, marked with the telltale signs of plasma burns and kinetic weapon impacts. His left arm was gone entirely, replaced by a crude mechanical prosthetic that clicked and whirred softly whenever he moved it. 2 of his 4 compound eyes had been damaged beyond repair, leaving him with a perpetual squint that made younger aliens uncomfortable when they looked at him. The group of recruits had been gathering courage for the better part of an hour, nursing their drinks and stealing glances at the old veteran. They were young, eager, and full of the kind of confidence that came from never having faced real combat. There was Crix, a Krillian whose natural armor plates still held the lustrous sheen of youth, and whose mandibles clicked excitedly whenever he spoke about the upcoming campaign. Beside him sat 2 Zenthran siblings, their crystalline skin formations catching the cantina's dim light as they whispered to each other in their musical language. 3 young Veltar completed the group, their blue carapaces unmarked by battle scars, their 4 eyes bright with anticipation for the glory they believed awaited them. They had come to Kepler's Rest like so many others, seeking passage to the frontier worlds where the great powers were mobilizing for what everyone believed would be the final push against the human territories. The stories they had heard painted humans as a weak species, barely 2 centuries into their spacefaring age, protected only by their stubborn refusal to acknowledge the obvious superiority of the established galactic civilizations. The recruiting stations across known space were filled with volunteers eager to claim their share of human worlds and the resources they contained. Finally, the Krillian named Crix worked up enough courage to approach the old veteran's table. His natural armor made soft scraping sounds against the metal floor as he walked, a sound that caused Zixtara remaining functional eyes to look up from the neural stimulant he had been nursing for the past hour. The other recruits followed reluctantly, their earlier bravado fading as they came face to face with the reality of what war could do to a person. Crix cleared his throat, a sound that came out as a series of clicks and whistles through his mandibles. He had practiced what he wanted to say, but now that he was standing before the legendary commander of the 3rd Assault Fleet, the words seemed inadequate. Finally, he managed to speak in the common trade language that most species had adopted. For interstellar communication, the young Krillian explained that they had heard stories about Zixtara, about his service during the human conflict, about how he had commanded one of the largest fleets ever assembled by the alliance of species that had first encountered humanity. They wanted to hear about the war, about what it was really like to fight against the humans, and most importantly, they wanted advice on how to achieve glory in the upcoming campaign that everyone was calling the final solution to the human problem. Zixtara listened to their questions with growing amusement, though the expression was difficult to read on his alien features. When they finished speaking, he gestured with his remaining organic arm for them to sit at his table. The recruits arranged themselves around the worn metal surface, their excitement barely contained as they waited for wisdom from a veteran of the most, talked about conflict and recent galactic history. The old Veltar took a long drink from his neural stimulant, the liquid designed to help his damaged nervous system process information more efficiently. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen things that changed him fundamentally, someone who had learned truths that he wished he could forget. He began by telling them that their enthusiasm reminded him of himself 40 cycles ago, when he had been young and confident and absolutely certain that the human species represented nothing more than a minor obstacle to the rightful expansion of civilized space. Back then, he had commanded a fleet of 300 ships, crewed by the finest warriors from 3 different species, armed with weapons that had been perfected over millennia of warfare among the established powers. The humans had seemed like nothing more than children playing with weapons they barely understood. Their ships were crude, their tactics were primitive, and their technology was laughably inferior to what the galactic civilizations had developed over thousands of years of advancement. Intelligence reports suggested that they had only recently developed faster-than-light travel, that their military was a patchwork of competing national forces that could barely cooperate with each other, and that their weapons were still based on ancient chemical propulsion systems that any decent energy shield could deflect. Zixtara paused in his story to show the recruits his prosthetic arm, holding it up so they could see the crude workmanship and the obvious signs of field repair. The mechanical joints were rough and unpolished, clearly assembled from whatever materials had been available rather than properly manufactured. It was the kind of replacement that someone got when proper medical facilities were not available. When survival was more important than aesthetics or comfort, he told them that this arm was what he had received in exchange for underestimating humanity, but that the physical damage was nothing compared to what he had learned about the true nature of the species they were so eager to fight. The real horror, he explained, was not what humans could do to your body in combat, but what they revealed about themselves when they were pushed to the edge of extinction. The recruits leaned forward eagerly, their eyes fixed on the old veteran, as he prepared to share the story that would change everything they thought they knew about humans and about war itself. In the dim light of the cantina, surrounded by the sounds of a dozen different species going about their business, Zixtara began to tell them about the day his fleet first encountered human forces and discovered that everything they thought they knew about warfare was about to be proven wrong. Zixtara's remaining eyes grew distant as he began to recall the events that had changed his understanding of warfare forever. The recruits around his table sat in complete silence, their drinks forgotten as they waited for him to continue his story. The old veteran's prosthetic arm clicked softly as he adjusted his position, the sound somehow making his words seem more real and immediate. The first encounter with human forces had happened at Proxima Station, a small outpost on the edge of what the humans called their solar system. Intelligence reports had suggested that the station housed maybe 3,000 humans and served as a refueling point for their primitive exploration vessels. Zixtara's fleet had approached expecting to find a lightly defended target that would surrender quickly once they realized the hopelessness of their situation. The station itself had looked exactly like what the reports described, a collection of rotating metal cylinders connected by docking tubes and solar collectors. It was clearly built from older technology, with none of the elegant curves or energy-efficient designs that marked proper galactic architecture. The human ships docked at the station were equally unimpressive, boxy cargo haulers and small patrol craft that looked like they had been assembled in someone's garage, rather than proper shipyards. Zixtara had opened communications with the station, expecting to receive an immediate surrender. The humans had responded through their commander, a female called Jake Morrison, who spoke in the flat, emotionless tone that humans seemed to use for official communications. She had informed the alien fleet that Proxima Station would not surrender, and that any attempt to board or attack the facility would be met with appropriate defensive measures. The alien commander had found this response amusing rather than concerning. His fleet included 3 battle cruisers, dozens of escort vessels, and enough firepower to reduce the entire station to scrap metal within minutes. The idea that a few thousand humans with primitive weapons could pose any real threat to his forces seemed so ridiculous that he had actually laughed when he heard Morrison's message. The first sign that something was wrong came when the alien fleet moved into attack formation and the humans began launching what appeared to be escape pods. Zixtara had assumed that the civilian population was evacuating while the military personnel prepared for a hopeless last stand. This seemed like reasonable behavior from a species that understood they were outmatched but wanted to save as many lives as possible. The alien fleet had moved closer to the station, bringing their weapons into optimal range while their shields absorbed the pathetic return fire from the human defensive systems. The kinetic projectiles that the humans used bounced harmlessly off the energy barriers that protected the alien ships, while their chemical explosive warheads created pretty light shows, but did no actual damage to properly shielded vessels. Everything changed when those escape pods reached the alien fleet and began to explode. The humans had not been evacuating civilians at all. They had been launching crude but effective weapons that their sensors had not been able to distinguish from legitimate evacuation craft. Each pod contained enough explosive material to damage an unshielded ship, but more importantly, they had been packed with metal fragments and debris that scattered across a wide area when they detonated. The debris field created by the exploding pods disrupted the alien formation and forced several ships to raise their shields to maximum power to protect against the high-velocity fragments. This meant that the fleet's energy reserves were being drained by what should have been a minor inconvenience, and their ability to maintain formation was compromised by the need to avoid collision with the expanding cloud of wreckage. While the alien commanders were dealing with this unexpected complication, the humans launched their real attack. Hidden compartments in the station's hull opened to reveal weapons that the initial scans had not detected, and the human ships that had appeared to be harmless cargo haulers suddenly began firing missiles that moved faster and hit harder than anything in the intelligence reports. But the real shock came when alien boarding parties finally managed to breach the station's hull and began moving through the corridors towards strategic objectives. The humans who met them there fought with a ferocity that none of the alien soldiers had ever encountered before. They did not retreat when wounded, they did not surrender when outnumbered, and they seemed completely unconcerned with their own survival as long as they could inflict damage on their enemies, Zixthara described the reports that came back from his boarding teams, stories that had seemed impossible to believe at the time. Human soldiers who continued fighting with broken bones and severe injuries, who used their own bodies as weapons when their guns ran out of ammunition, who detonated explosive charges even when they knew the blast would kill them along with their enemies. One particular incident had stuck in his memory for all the cycles since the war ended. A human officer called Lisa Grant had been cornered in the station's command center with a handful of soldiers and no way to escape. Instead of surrendering, she had triggered the station's self-destruct sequence and then held off the alien boarding party for 20 minutes while the countdown proceeded. The aliens had known that the station was about to explode. They had known that everyone inside would die, but Grant and her people had continued fighting anyway. They had used furniture as barricades, improvised weapons from maintenance equipment, and even thrown tools and personal items at the alien soldiers when they ran out of proper ammunition. When the alien forces finally retreated from the doomed station, they left behind 47 dead soldiers and twice that number wounded. The humans had lost everyone, but they had taken a significant portion of the boarding force with them into death. More importantly, they had demonstrated something that would haunt every alien who witnessed it for the rest of their lives. They had shown that humans did not fight to win in the traditional sense. They fought to make their enemies pay the highest possible price for victory, even when that victory was inevitable. They treated their own lives as resources to be spent wisely rather than preserved at all costs, and they seemed to find meaning in sacrifice that other species could not understand. The destruction of Proxima Station had been recorded as a minor victory for the alien alliance, but Zixthara knew better. He had seen the faces of his soldiers when they returned from the boarding action, and he had read the reports of what they had witnessed inside those corridors. The humans had lost their station and everyone on it, but they had won something much more valuable. They had planted the first seeds of doubt in the minds of their enemies. The cantina had grown quieter around Zixthara's table as other patrons seemed to sense the weight of the story being told. The old veteran's voice carried a tremor that had not been there when he began speaking, and the recruits found themselves leaning closer to catch every word. His prosthetic arm made soft clicking sounds as he reached for his drink. The the mechanical joints struggling with the simple movement. After the incident at Proxima Station, the alien high command had decided that heavier force was needed to break human resistance. The alliance between the Veltar Empire, Krillian Confederacy, and Zenthran Republic had committed additional fleets to what they believed would be a quick campaign to crush human expansion before it could become a real threat to established galactic order. Zixthara had been given command of an even larger force and sent to attack New Geneva, a human colony world that served as a major shipbuilding center and military headquarters for their outer rim territories. Intelligence reports suggested that the planet housed several million humans and contained the largest concentration of their military forces outside their home system. The alien fleet that approached New Geneva was massive by any standard, containing over 500 ships, including multiple dreadnoughts and planet crackers that could reduce entire continents to molten glass. The humans defending the system had maybe 50 vessels, most of them converted civilian ships that looked like they had been hastily armed with whatever weapons the defenders could find. Admiral Karen Matthews commanded the human defense fleet from a ship called the Liberty, a converted passenger liner that had been fitted with missile tubes and armor plating in what appeared to be a desperate attempt to create a warship from civilian components. Her fleet included cargo haulers with weapons bolted to their hulls, mining ships that had been turned into missile platforms, and passenger transports that now carried fighters instead of tourists. When Zixthara opened communications to demand surrender, Matthews had responded with words that still echoed in his memory cycles later. She had said that New Geneva would not surrender, that every human ship would fight until destroyed, and that the alien fleet was welcome to try taking the system if they thought the price was worth paying. The alien commander had found her defiance puzzling rather than intimidating. His fleet possessed overwhelming firepower advantage and advanced technology that should have made the outcome inevitable. The humans appeared to be planning another futile last stand that would accomplish nothing except getting more of their people killed for no strategic gain. The battle began with the alien fleet advancing in standard formation while the human ships scattered like prey animals fleeing from predators. This seemed to confirm that human tactics were as primitive as their technology, and Zixthara had ordered his ships to pursue and destroy the fleeing vessels before moving on to bombard the planet itself. The first sign that something was wrong came when one of the fleeing human ships, a converted or freighter commanded by Captain Ben Rodriguez, suddenly reversed course and accelerated directly toward the alien flagship. The ship's engines were running far beyond safe parameters, and its hull was glowing from the heat generated by its overloaded power systems. Rodriguez had loaded his ship with every explosive device the human defenders could find, turning the entire vessel into a massive bomb that he piloted personally toward the center of the alien formation. The freighter absorbed incredible damage as it approached, its hull punctured in dozens of places and its crew dying at their posts, but it continued its suicidal charge until it rammed directly into a Veltar battlecruiser. The explosion had been visible from the planet's surface, a brief new star that marked the death of both ships and everyone aboard them. The alien vessel had been completely destroyed while the human freighter had been vaporized. But the psychological impact of watching a civilian cargo ship deliberately sacrifice itself to take out a military target was something that no alien commander had prepared for. More human ships began making similar attacks, using their vessels as guided weapons rather than traditional warships. The aliens found themselves facing an enemy that treated their most valuable assets as expendable ammunition, and the careful formations that had served galactic militaries for thousands of years began to break down under the pressure of constant suicide attacks. But the real horror began when human engineers started adapting alien technology faster than anyone had thought possible. A human specialist called Amy Shun had somehow managed to reverse engineer plasma cannon technology from wreckage recovered during the battle, and within days she had not only figured out how the weapons worked but had found ways to improve their efficiency and power output. Human ships that had been armed with primitive kinetic weapons suddenly began appearing with plasma cannons that performed better than the original alien versions. The humans had somehow managed to combine their own industrial techniques with captured alien technology to create hybrid weapons that outperformed anything either side had fielded at the start of the war. Dr. Paul Bennett led a team of human scientists who seemed to treat every alien weapon they encountered as a puzzle to be solved rather than a superior technology to be feared. They dissected captured equipment with the same methodical approach that they might use to study an interesting rock formation, and they consistently found ways to adapt alien innovations to human manufacturing techniques. The humans began deploying weapons that should not have existed, combinations of alien energy systems and human engineering that created devices more effective than either side could have built alone. Their ships started appearing with shield generators copied from alien designs but powered by human fusion reactors, creating defensive systems that were both more durable and more efficient than the originals. Zixthara described watching human tactics evolve in real time as their commanders learned from every engagement and adapted their strategies to counter alien advantages. They began using swarm tactics with small ships to overwhelm individual targets, coordinated attacks that treated entire fleets as single weapon systems, and deception techniques that made it impossible to predict what kind of resistance any given target might offer. The siege of New Geneva had lasted for months instead of the days that alien planners had predicted, and by the time it ended, both sides had paid a price that seemed impossible to justify. The humans had lost their colony and most of their defending fleet, but they had destroyed over 200 alien ships and demonstrated capabilities that changed everything about how the war would be fought. The young recruits around the table stared at Zixthara with expressions that mixed fascination and growing unease as they began to understand that the humans they wanted to fight were not the primitive weaklings they had been led to expect. The recruits noticed that Zixthara's voice had grown quieter as he continued his story, and his remaining functional eyes seemed to be seeing things that were not in the cantina around them. The old veteran's prosthetic arm had begun to shake slightly, the mechanical joints making soft grinding sounds that spoke of poor maintenance and long use. When he reached for his drink this time, some of the neural stimulant spilled onto the table's metal surface. After the costly victory at New Geneva, the alien alliance had grown desperate and angry. The war that was supposed to have ended within months had dragged on for years, consuming resources and ships at a rate that threatened the stability of all three participating civilizations. Public opinion across alien space had turned against the conflict as casualty reports mounted and the promised easy victories failed to materialize. The high command of the alliance had made a decision that would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. They would end the war by striking directly at Earth itself, the human homeworld that contained the majority of their population and the heart of their industrial capacity. If humans were willing to fight so hard for distant colonies and outposts, surely they would surrender when faced with the complete destruction of their birth planet. Zixthara had been given command of the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history, over 2,000 ships from all three alien civilizations working together with the single goal of breaking human resistance once and for all. The fleet included planet crackers capable of shattering worlds, bioweapons that could sterilize entire continents, and enough conventional firepower to reduce Earth's surface to molten rock. The alien armada had approached the human home system, expecting to find desperate defenders making a final hopeless stand around their precious homeworld. Instead, they found something that defied every assumption they had made about human capabilities and human nature. The space around Earth had been turned into the most elaborate defensive network that any species had ever constructed. Orbital platforms bristled with weapons that combined human engineering with captured alien technology in ways that should have been impossible. The asteroid belt had been converted into a vast ammunition depot with massive rocks fitted with engines and guidance systems that turned each one into a planet-killing projectile fleet. Admiral Steve Parker commanded the human defense forces from a massive space station that had been built from the wreckage of hundreds of ships destroyed in earlier battles. The station itself was a monument to human determination, a structure that incorporated design elements from dozens of different civilizations welded together with human stubbornness and ingenuity. When Zixthara demanded Earth's surrender, Parker had responded with words that still sent chills through the old veteran's memory. The human admiral had said that Earth would never surrender, that every human in the system would die fighting before they would allow their homeworld to be conquered, and that the alien fleet was welcome to try taking the planet if they were prepared to pay the full price for it. The battle that followed had redefined what warfare meant in the Galactic Age. The humans had deployed weapons that violated every convention of civilized conflict, systems that targeted alien biology specifically and turned the invaders' own advantages against them. They had studied captured soldiers and developed viruses that attacked alien nervous systems, gases that dissolved alien armor, and radiation frequencies that disrupted alien electronics. But the most terrifying moment had come when Captain Nicole Barnes led what humans called the Valkyrie Squadron directly into the heart of the alien formation. 50 ships crewed entirely by volunteers who knew they would not survive the mission, flying directly toward the alien flagship with their engines overloaded and their weapons systems removed to make room for more explosives. Zixthara remembered watching those 50 ships approach through the chaos of the battle, their hulls glowing from engine heat and their communications channels filled with something he had never heard before in combat. The human crews were singing, their voices joined together in harmonies that spoke of shared purpose and acceptance of death. The songs they sang were not the death chants or warrior hymns that other species used in battle. They were songs about home, about the people they were dying to protect, about the future they believed their sacrifice would make possible. They sang about children who would grow up free, about planets that would remain unconquered, about the idea that some things were worth dying for. When the Valkyrie Squadron reached the alien flagship, their coordinated detonation had created an explosion that was visible from Earth's surface. The blast had destroyed not just the target ship but dozens of surrounding vessels, creating a gap in the alien formation that human forces immediately exploited with devastating effectiveness. The aliens had begun to realize that they were not fighting a normal military force, but something fundamentally different from anything they had encountered before. The humans did not fight to win battles in the traditional sense, but to make victory so costly that it became meaningless. They were willing to sacrifice everything they had for the chance to inflict disproportionate damage on their enemies. General Linda Foster had coordinated ground defenses that turned Earth's surface into a nightmare for any invasion force. Human soldiers had prepared positions that could only be taken by completely destroying them, and every destroyed position triggered automated systems that made the surrounding area uninhabitable for alien forces. The humans had prepared for the possibility of losing their homeworld by ensuring that conquering it would provide no benefit to their enemies. They had rigged industrial facilities to self-destruct, poisoned water supplies that alien biology could not filter, and created dead zones where radiation levels would remain lethal for thousands of years. More disturbing still, they had prepared their civilian population for a kind of resistance that no civilized species had ever contemplated. Human children had been trained in weapons use and sabotage techniques, while human adults had been organized into networks that could continue fighting even after all organized military resistance had been eliminated. The alien fleet had possessed the firepower to destroy Earth completely, but doing so would have meant committing genocide on a scale that would have horrified their own populations and accomplished nothing strategically. The humans had made it clear that they would rather see their world burned to ash than conquered, and they had the weapons and determination to make that choice a reality. Zixthara's voice dropped to barely above a whisper as he described the moment when both sides realized that the war could only end in mutual annihilation or negotiated peace, and that the humans were perfectly willing to choose annihilation if that was what it took to remain free. The cantina around Zixthara's table had fallen into complete silence, with even the background chatter from other patrons seeming to fade away as the old veteran prepared to finish his story. His prosthetic arm had stopped its constant clicking, and now rested motionless on the table's metal surface, while his remaining eyes reflected the cantina's dim lighting with an intensity that made the young recruits uncomfortable. The war had reached a point where both sides understood that continued fighting would result in the complete destruction of multiple civilizations. The alien alliance had the firepower to sterilize every human world, but doing so would require committing resources and crossing moral lines that would destroy their own societies in the process. The humans had demonstrated beyond any doubt that they would rather die fighting than accept conquest, and they possessed the weapons and determination to make that choice catastrophically expensive for everyone involved. The ceasefire negotiations had taken place on Luna Base, a human facility on Earth's moon that had been captured by alien forces early in the battle for the human home system. General Marcus Webb had commanded the base when it fell, and his decision to allow the aliens to take the facility intact had seemed like simple pragmatism at the time. The base contained valuable intelligence about human military capabilities, and could serve as a staging area for the final assault on Earth itself. It was only during the peace talks that the aliens discovered why Webb had been so willing to surrender Luna Base without a fight. The general had known that capturing the facility would give alien negotiators access to something far more valuable than military intelligence or strategic position. He had known they would discover the truth about what humanity really was, and he had calculated that this knowledge would end the war more effectively than any weapon. The alien negotiators had been given complete access to human historical databases as part of the ceasefire agreement, and what they found there had changed everything about how every species in the galaxy understood the nature of warfare itself. The humans had not been hiding their true capabilities or their real history. They had simply never thought to explain it because they assumed that any intelligent species would have similar experiences. Dr. Helen North, the chief human negotiator, had served as a guide through the historical records that documented thousands of years of human conflict. She had explained that what the aliens had experienced during their war with humanity was not unusual behavior for humans, but simply how they had always fought when facing existential threats. The aliens discovered that humans had been fighting each other with a brutality and innovation that made their own military traditions look like children's games. The records showed conflicts where entire continents had been turned into battlefields, where weapons of mass destruction had been deployed against civilian populations, where the total economic output of multiple nations had been devoted to creating new and more effective ways to kill other humans. The humans called these conflicts world wars, and they had happened multiple times throughout their history with increasing levels of destructive capability. The aliens learned about chemical weapons that turned battlefields into poisonous wastelands, about nuclear devices that could eliminate entire cities in seconds, about biological agents designed specifically to target human physiology with maximum lethality. But the most disturbing discovery was that despite this incredible capacity for violence, humans were also capable of cooperation and sacrifice on a scale that defied comprehension. When faced with external threats, the same species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of killing each other could unite with frightening effectiveness. Dr. North had explained that every technique the aliens had encountered during their war, every tactic that had seemed so alien and terrifying, was actually copied from methods that humans had developed for fighting other humans. The suicide attacks, the total war strategies, the willingness to sacrifice everything for a strategic advantage. All of these had been refined through thousands of years of conflict against opponents who were just as clever and determined as humanity itself. The aliens realized that they had been fighting a species that had learned warfare by practicing against enemies who understood human psychology, human tactics, and human weaknesses better than any alien ever could. Every strategy that had ever been effective against humans had already been tried by other humans, and countermeasures had been developed through centuries of brutal trial and error. The peace treaty that ended the war had been signed not because either side lacked the ability to continue fighting, but because both sides finally understood what total victory would actually cost. The aliens could have eventually destroyed humanity, but only by becoming something monstrous in the process. The humans could have continued their resistance indefinitely, but only by accepting losses that would have reduced their civilization. To Ash and Memory, Zixtara explained that the treaty contained provisions that no previous galactic agreement had ever included, rules about warfare that reflected the new understanding of what advanced civilizations were capable of when pushed beyond all reasonable limits. The document served as both a peace agreement and a warning to future generations about the price of fighting wars with species that had no concept of acceptable losses. The old veteran finished his drink and looked directly at each of the young recruits around his table, his remaining eyes reflecting decades of experience that none of them could fully understand. He told them that the humans had been granted full membership in the galactic community not because they had been defeated, but because every other species had finally realized what they truly were. Humans were apex predators who had spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to hunt and kill other apex predators just like themselves. They had developed technology, tactics, and psychology through millions of years of competition against opponents who shared their intelligence, their determination, and their complete willingness to do whatever survival required. The recruits, who had come to the cantina seeking glory and easy victories, now sat in stunned silence as they processed what they had heard. Zixtara stood slowly, his prosthetic arm whirring softly as he prepared to leave, and offered them one final piece of advice. He told them that any species foolish enough to fight humans would discover exactly what apex predators look like when they stopped pretending to be civilized, and that the only intelligent response to such a discovery was to make sure it never became necessary. The war had ended with mutual respect rather than total destruction, only because both sides had chosen wisdom over pride at the last possible moment. The old veteran limped away from the table, leaving the young recruits to contemplate whether the glory they sought was worth the price they would have to pay, and whether they truly understood what they would be fighting if they chose to make humanity their enemy.